The telegram arrived on the worst possible day of Russell Whitmore's life, though he would not know until later that it also heralded his salvation. He stood in the lawyer's office in Reno, Nevada, clutching the worn brim of his hat as Mr. Pemberton read aloud the terms of his father's will with all the warmth of a winter wind cutting through the Sierra Nevada mountains. It was March of 1882, and the spring thaw had barely begun. "Your father's will is quite clear, Mr. Whitmore," the lawyer said, adjusting his spectacles. "The ranch passes to you on the condition that you are married within 90 days of his death. If you remain unmarried, the property will be sold at auction, and the proceeds donated to the territorial government for infrastructure development." Russell felt his jaw tighten. His father had been dead for 3 weeks, which meant he had roughly 10 weeks left to find a wife or lose everything his family had built over the past 20 years. The Whitmore Ranch sprawled across 2,000 acres of Nevada high desert, with mountain streams that never ran dry and grazing land that could support 500 head of cattle. It was worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, but finding a wife in 70 days seemed an impossible task. "Did he say why?" Russell asked, though he already knew the answer. "He wanted to ensure the family line continued," Pemberton replied. "Your father was a practical man. He believed a ranch needed a family to thrive, not just a solitary rancher." Russell left the office with his mind churning like storm clouds over the mountains. At 28 years old, he had devoted his life to building the ranch alongside his father. Romance had always seemed like something for later, after the hard work was done. Now later had arrived with the force of a lightning strike, and he was utterly unprepared. He walked down Virginia Street, past the saloons and gambling halls that made Reno famous, past the railway depot where the transcontinental line brought dreamers and desperados alike. The town had grown considerably in recent years, swelling with miners, ranchers, and those seeking their fortunes in the high desert. Surely among all these people, Russell thought, there must be someone who needed what he could offer. That evening, he sat in the Golden Sage Saloon nursing a whiskey he barely tasted, when he overheard 2 women talking at a nearby table. One was Marjorie Keene, the saloon owner's wife, and the other was a young woman Russell had never seen before. The stranger had dark honey-colored hair pinned up beneath a simple bonnet, and even in the dim lamplight, he could see the exhaustion etched into her delicate features. "I appreciate the kindness, Mrs. Keene, but I cannot impose any longer," the young woman was saying. Her voice carried the refined accent of someone educated back east. "I have been here 3 days already, and I must find employment or lodging I can afford." "Nonsense, dear. You are welcome to stay above the saloon as long as needed," Marjorie replied, but her tone suggested the offer had limits. "Though I confess, decent work for a woman alone is scarce in Reno. Most respectable positions require references, and given your circumstances." The young woman's shoulders sagged. "I understand. I will find something. I must." Russell found himself standing and crossing to their table before his mind fully registered the decision. Both women looked up in surprise as he removed his hat and held it respectfully. "Pardon the interruption, ladies," he said. "My name is Russell Whitmore. I own a ranch north of town, and I could not help but overhear that you are seeking employment, miss." The young woman's eyes widened. They were a remarkable shade of gray-green, like sage after a rain. "I am, Mr. Whitmore. My name is Hannah Erickson." "Miss Erickson arrived from Boston last week," Marjorie explained, her eyes gleaming with sudden interest. "She came west to marry, but the gentleman in question proved to be less than honest about his circumstances." Hannah's cheeks colored. "He was already married." His actual wife made that quite clear when I arrived at what I believed would be my new home. Russell felt a surge of anger toward a man he had never met. What kind of scoundrel would deceive a woman so thoroughly? That is unconscionable. I am sorry you experienced such treatment. Thank you, Hannah said quietly. But sympathy does not solve my current predicament. I spent nearly all my money on the train fare west, and I have no means to return to Boston. Not that I could if I wanted to. There is nothing for me there anymore. Russell pulled out a chair and sat down, his heart hammering. This was madness, surely, but the circumstances seemed almost providential. Miss Erickson, I have a proposition that may sound highly irregular, but I ask that you hear me out completely before you respond. Hannah exchanged glances with Marjorie, then nodded slowly. Very well. I am in need of a wife, Russell said bluntly. My father passed recently, and his will stipulates that I must be married within 90 days or lose the ranch. I have 10 weeks remaining. You need a home and security. I am proposing a marriage of practical convenience. You would have a roof over your head, food, and all necessities provided for. In return, you would manage the household and help with the ranch accounts. My foreman's wife, Maria, lives on the property with her family. You would not be isolated or without female companionship. The words tumbled out faster than he intended, and he could see Hannah's expression shift from surprise to shock to something that might have been cautious consideration. You are proposing marriage to a woman you met 5 minutes ago. Hannah asked. I am proposing a business arrangement to a woman who needs what I can provide, just as I need what you can provide, Russell clarified. I will not pretend this is a love match, Miss Erickson, but it would be honest and mutually beneficial. You would be mistress of your own home, with full authority over the household. I am not a cruel man, and I give you my word that I would treat you with respect. Marjorie looked between them with barely concealed excitement. Hannah, dear, you could do far worse. The Whitmore ranch is well regarded, and Russell here is known as a fair and decent man. Hannah sat very still, her hands folded on the table. Russell could see her mind working, weighing options that probably all seemed equally impossible. Finally, she looked directly at him with those remarkable eyes and asked, What would you expect from this arrangement, Mr. Whitmore? Please be entirely honest. I would expect you to run the household, which includes a main ranch house of 6 rooms, Russell said. Cooking, though Maria often helps with larger meals. Managing supplies and accounts, as you are clearly educated enough to handle such matters. Presenting as my wife to the outside world so that the will's conditions are met. Beyond that, I would expect basic courtesy and cooperation. Nothing more. Nothing more, Hannah repeated, and he understood what she was asking. I would not force attentions on you that were unwelcome, Russell said, holding her gaze steadily. You would have your own room. What develops between us beyond a business arrangement, if anything, would be entirely by mutual consent. Hannah was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady despite the tremor Russell could see in her hands. I left Boston because there was nothing there for me anymore. My parents died of fever last year, and I have no siblings. The man I was engaged to there broke off our understanding when I lost my inheritance to my father's debts. I came west for a fresh start, only to discover I had been deceived again. I am tired of being at the mercy of circumstance and the dishonesty of others. I am being honest with you, Russell said. This is not romance. This is survival for both of us, but it is honest survival. Hannah lifted her chin with a dignity that Russell found himself admiring. Then I accept your proposal, Mr. Whitmore. When would this arrangement need to take place? As soon as possible, Russell admitted. The clock is running on my father's deadline. Tomorrow, then, Hannah said. I assume there is a preacher in Reno who can perform the ceremony. Reverend Matthews at the Presbyterian Church, Marjorie supplied helpfully. I am certain he could accommodate you tomorrow afternoon. Russell felt something between relief and terror wash over him. He was actually doing this. He was marrying a complete stranger to save his ranch. Tomorrow afternoon, then. Miss Erickson, I will secure a room for you here tonight at the hotel next door on my account. I will collect you at noon tomorrow and we will speak with the Reverend. That is acceptable, Hannah said. She extended her hand across the table, and Russell shook it, feeling the delicate bones beneath skin that was too soft for the hard life of a ranch. He wondered if she truly understood what she was agreeing to. That night, Russell lay awake in his room above the mercantile, staring at the ceiling and questioning every decision that had led him to this moment. He was going to marry a woman whose last name he barely knew, whose history was a mystery, whose temperament and character were completely unknown to him. It was the act of a desperate man, which he supposed he was. But when he closed his eyes, he saw those sage-green eyes looking at him with a courage that matched his own desperation, and he thought that perhaps, just perhaps, this would work. The next day dawned clear and cold, with the last of winter still clinging to the mountain peaks visible from Reno. Russell dressed in his best suit, a charcoal gray wool that had been tailored in San Francisco 3 years earlier, and still fit him well. He had built his frame through years of ranch work, and the suit pulled slightly across his shoulders, but it would do for a wedding, even one as unconventional as this. He arrived at the hotel at precisely noon to find Hannah waiting in the lobby. She wore a simple dress of deep blue calico with a white collar, and her hair was arranged in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. She looked pale but composed, and when she saw him, she managed a small smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Miss Erickson," he greeted her, offering his arm. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I shall ever be, Mr. Whitmore," she replied, taking his arm. Her hand trembled slightly where it rested on his sleeve. They walked to the Presbyterian Church in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Reverend Matthews, a kindly man in his 60s with a shock of white hair, met them at the door with a concerned expression. "Russell, are you certain about this?" he asked quietly. "Marriage is a sacred commitment not to be entered into lightly." "I am certain, Reverend," Russell said firmly. "Miss Erickson and I have discussed the matter thoroughly, and we are both in agreement." The Reverend looked at Hannah, who nodded. "It is my choice, Reverend Matthews. I am entering this marriage of my own free will." "Very well," the Reverend sighed. "Let us proceed then. Do you have witnesses?" Marjorie Keene bustled in at that moment with her husband Frank, both of them beaming as though this were the love match of the century rather than a desperate arrangement between strangers. "We will stand as witnesses," Marjorie announced. "Every wedding needs witnesses." The ceremony was brief and businesslike. Russell spoke his vows in a clear voice, promising to honor and protect Hannah for as long as they both lived. Hannah's voice wavered only slightly as she promised to honor and support Russell. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Russell leaned in to kiss his bride with the barest brush of his lips against hers, a formality that felt strange and intimate all at once. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore," Reverend Matthews said, though his tone suggested he still had reservations about the hasty union. They signed the marriage certificate with Marjorie and Frank as witnesses, and just like that, Russell was married. He had a wife. He would keep his ranch. But as they stepped out into the bright Nevada sunshine, he could not shake the feeling that he had just complicated his life in ways he could not yet imagine. "I have a wagon waiting," Russell said. The ranch is about an hour's ride north. Do you have belongings to collect? Only a single trunk, Hannah replied. Everything I own in the world fits in one trunk. Something about the way she said it, with such quiet resignation, made Russell's chest tighten with an unfamiliar emotion. He collected her trunk from the hotel, loaded it into the wagon, and helped Hannah onto the bench seat. She arranged her skirts carefully and folded her hands in her lap with a composure that seemed almost fragile. As they rode out of Reno, following the rutted road that led north into the high desert, Russell found himself stealing glances at his new wife. She sat straight-backed and still, watching the landscape roll by with an expression he could not quite read. The land here was spare and beautiful in its own way, all sage and scrub and rocky outcroppings, with the mountains rising in the distance like sleeping giants. "It is very different from Boston," Hannah said finally, breaking the silence. "There, everything is green and crowded. Here, the sky seems to go on forever." "It takes some getting used to," Russell admitted, "but there is freedom in all this space, room to breathe and build something that is truly your own." "Is that what you have done? Built something of your own?" Hannah asked. "My father and I built it together," Russell said. "He came west in '62 during the mining boom. He tried his hand at silver in Virginia City, but realized that the real wealth was in providing for the miners. He started the ranch to supply beef to the mining camps. By the time I was born, he had established a solid operation. I have been working the ranch since I was old enough to sit a horse." "He must have been a practical man," Hannah observed. "Practical to a fault," Russell agreed. "Which is why this marriage requirement should not have surprised me as much as it did. He always believed that a man needed a family to give his work meaning." "And what do you believe?" Hannah asked, turning to look at him directly. Russell considered the question carefully. "I believe that a ranch needs people who care about it to survive. Whether that is a family in the traditional sense or simply people committed to a common purpose, I am not certain. But I suppose we are about to find out." They rode in silence for a while longer until the ranch came into view. The main house sat on a slight rise, a sturdy structure of wood and stone with a wide front porch and a pitched roof designed to shed the occasional heavy snow. Behind it sprawled the barn, corrals, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings that made up a working cattle ranch. Smoke rose from the chimney of a smaller house about 100 yards from the main building, which Russell indicated was the foreman's residence. "That is where Miguel and Maria Torres live with their children," Russell explained. "Miguel has been with us for 12 years. He is the best horseman in Nevada and runs the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Maria is a wonder with anything involving food or medicine. Their children, Alina and Pablo, are 7 and 9. You will like them." Hannah took it all in with wide eyes. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "Austere, but beautiful." Russell helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk into the house. The interior was clean but clearly lacked a woman's touch, all practical furniture and bare walls. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. A kitchen extended off to the left, and a hallway led to the bedrooms on the right. "Your room is this way," Russell said, leading her down the hall. He opened the door to the largest of the 2 spare bedrooms, which faced east and caught the morning sun. It was simply furnished with a bed, wardrobe, washstand, and a single chair by the window. "I know it is not much, but you can arrange it however you like. There is a budget for household expenses, and you can order what you need from the mercantile in town." Hannah set her reticule on the chair and turned to face him. "Mr. Whitmore, I want to be clear about something. I intend to honor our agreement fully." I will manage your household and present as your wife in all public matters. But I also want you to know that I am grateful for your honesty. I have been lied to and deceived enough for one lifetime. Whatever this arrangement becomes, I appreciate that it began with truth." "I feel the same," Russell said. "And perhaps we could dispense with the formality. You can call me Russell and I will call you Hannah if that is acceptable." "That is acceptable," Hannah agreed, and for the first time since they met, she smiled fully. It transformed her face, bringing warmth to features that had been guarded and tense. Russell felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that his new wife was more than just a solution to his problem. She was a person with her own hurts and hopes, and he had just tied her life to his in ways neither of them could fully predict. Over the next few days, Hannah settled into the ranch with a quiet efficiency that surprised Russell. She took inventory of the household supplies, reorganized the kitchen to suit her preferences, and established a routine that brought order to the domestic chaos Russell had been living in since his father's death. Maria Torres came up to the main house the second day and found an instant ally in Hannah. "It is so good to have another woman here," Maria said in her lilting accent as she helped Hannah make bread in the kitchen. "Russell is a good man, but he has been living like a hermit. The house needed a woman's care. Hannah kneaded the dough with practiced hands. I am still learning my way around. Everything here is so different from what I knew back east." "You will learn," Maria assured her. "And if you need anything at all, you come find me. We take care of each other out here. It is the only way to survive." Russell, overhearing this exchange from the hallway where he had come in for lunch, felt a warmth in his chest. Perhaps this arrangement would work after all. Hannah was adapting, fitting into the rhythms of ranch life with a determination he had to admire. But at night, lying in his own bed down the hall from Hannah's room, Russell found himself increasingly aware of his new wife's presence in the house. He would hear her moving about, preparing for bed, and his imagination would supply images that had no place in a marriage of convenience. He reminded himself sternly that he had given his word, that nothing would happen without mutual consent, but his body seemed less concerned with the promises his mind had made for her part. Hannah was experiencing her own confusion. Russell Whitmore was not what she had expected. He was unfailingly courteous, rising early to bring in wood for the stove so the kitchen would be warm when she came out to make breakfast. He asked her opinion on household matters and actually listened to her answers. He worked brutally long hours managing the ranch, but always came in for the meals she prepared, complimenting her cooking and asking about her day. He was nothing like James, the Boston banker who had courted her with pretty words and false promises, only to abandon her when her father's business failed. He was nothing like Martin, the con man who had lured her west with promises of marriage while hiding the fact that he already had a wife. Russell was honest and steady and unexpectedly kind, and Hannah found herself watching him when he did not notice, admiring the way he moved with easy confidence, the way his hands were gentle when he handled the horses, despite being calloused from hard work. 2 weeks into their marriage, Russell received word that cattle thieves had been operating in the territory. A neighboring rancher had lost 50 head to rustlers who struck in the night and disappeared into the mountains. Russell called a meeting with Miguel and the ranch hands, 4 men who had been with the operation for years, to discuss increased security measures. Hannah overheard the discussion from the kitchen where she was preparing the evening meal. She felt a cold fear settle in her stomach at the thought of Russell confronting dangerous criminals. She had not expected to care whether her husband of convenience came home safely, but apparently her heart had not read their agreement. That night, she knocked on the door to Russell's room. He opened it, surprise evident on his face. He had removed his shirt and stood in his undershirt and pants, his dark hair damp from washing. "Hannah, is something wrong?" he asked. "I wanted to speak with you about these cattle thieves," she said, keeping her eyes firmly on his face and not on the way his undershirt revealed the muscled contours of his chest. "Are you planning to confront them yourself?" "If necessary," Russell said. "It is my responsibility to protect the ranch and the cattle." "It is also your responsibility to stay alive," Hannah said, more sharply than she intended. "What good is the ranch if you are dead?" Russell's expression softened. "Are you worried about me, Hannah?" She lifted her chin defensively. "I am worried about my home. If something happens to you, I am back where I started with nothing and nowhere to go." It was not entirely true, and they both knew it, but Russell nodded slowly. "I will be careful. I promise you that. Miguel and I have dealt with rustlers before. We know how to protect what is ours without taking foolish risks." "See that you do," Hannah said, and retreated to her room before he could see the tears that threatened to spill. She was not supposed to care this much. This was supposed to be a practical arrangement, nothing more. But somewhere between the daily rhythms of cooking his meals and managing his household and listening to him talk about his dreams for the ranch, she had started to care deeply, and it terrified her. The rustlers struck 3 nights later. Russell and Miguel had set up a rotation of night watches, and it was young Tom Hendricks who spotted the movement near the southern pasture. He fired a warning shot and rode hard for the main house, raising the alarm. Russell grabbed his rifle and was out the door before Hannah could fully process what was happening. She stood on the porch in her nightgown and wrapper, watching as Russell and 4 of his men rode out into the darkness. Maria came up to stand beside her, wrapping a shawl around Hannah's shoulders. "They will be fine," Maria said firmly. "Miguel has been through worse, and so has Russell. They are smart men." But smart men could still be shot, Hannah thought, and the next 2 hours were the longest of her life. She and Maria waited in the kitchen, keeping coffee hot and trying not to imagine the worst. When they finally heard horses approaching, both women rushed to the door. Russell dismounted stiffly, and in the lamplight spilling from the house, Hannah could see blood on his sleeve. She was across the porch and down the steps before she consciously decided to move. "You are hurt," she said, reaching for his arm. "It is just a graze," Russell said, but his face was pale. "One of them got a shot off before they ran. We ran them off and recovered the cattle they were trying to drive away." "Inside now," Hannah commanded, and Russell found himself obeying his wife's firm tone. She sat him down at the kitchen table while Maria fetched the medical supplies. Between them, they cleaned and bandaged the wound on Russell's upper arm, a bullet graze that had torn through his shirt and left a bloody furrow in his skin. "You said you would be careful," Hannah said, and her voice shook despite her best efforts. "They ran at the first real resistance," Russell said. "I was careful, Hannah. This is nothing." "It is not nothing," Hannah said fiercely, tying off the bandage with more force than necessary. "You could have been killed." Russell caught her hand in his, stilling her agitated movements. "But I was not. I am here and I am fine. Hannah, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, and he saw tears there that she was fighting to contain. "I did not mean to frighten you," he said softly. "I am sorry." "I do not have the right to be frightened," Hannah whispered. "This is a business arrangement. I should not care so much whether you come home or not." "Should not," Russell repeated, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. "But you do." It was not a question. Hannah pulled her hand away and stood abruptly. "I will make fresh coffee. The men will need it." She busied herself at the stove, giving Russell her back, and he did not push further. But something had shifted between them that night, an acknowledgement that their carefully maintained boundaries were beginning to blur. Over the following weeks, Spring truly arrived in the high desert. The sagebrush bloomed silver green, and wildflowers appeared in unexpected places. The cattle grew fat on new grass, and Russell's wound healed cleanly, leaving a scar that Hannah could not help but notice when he rolled up his sleeves for ranch work. They fell into a comfortable partnership. Hannah proved to have a mind for figures and took over all the ranch accounts, finding several ways to reduce costs without sacrificing quality. Russell discovered that she had a way with the horses, approaching them with a gentle confidence that the animals responded to. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch after supper, watching the sun set behind the mountains and talking about everything and nothing. Russell told her about growing up on the ranch, about his mother who had died when he was 12, about the year he spent in San Francisco studying business before realizing his heart belonged to the land. Hannah told him about her childhood in Boston, about parents who had loved her fiercely but struggled financially, about the education her father had insisted she receive despite their circumstances. He believed women should be able to think for themselves, Hannah said one evening as they watched the stars emerge in the vast Nevada sky. He was unusual in that regard. Most of his peers thought educating a daughter was a waste of resources. He was right, Russell said. You have one of the sharpest minds I have encountered. The changes you have made to the account system alone will save us considerable money over the course of the year. Hannah felt warmth bloom in her chest at the praise. I like having something useful to do. Back in Boston, I was expected to be ornamental. Here, I can actually contribute. You contribute more than you know, Russell said, and there was something in his voice that made Hannah turn to look at him. In the twilight, his features were shadowed, but his eyes were intent on her face. Russell, she began, not sure what she wanted to say. He reached over and took her hand where it rested on the arm of her chair. His palm was warm and rough against her skin. Hannah, I know we began this as a business arrangement, but I need you to know that you have become more to me than a convenient solution. You have become important. Your happiness matters to me. Hannah's breath caught. It does, very much, Russell said. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture somehow more intimate than anything they had yet shared. I will not push you. Our agreement stands as it was made, but I wanted you to know that if you ever wanted something more from this marriage, I would welcome it. Hannah's heart was hammering in her chest. She had been fighting her growing feelings for Russell for weeks now, telling herself it was foolish to fall for a man who had married her out of necessity. But here he was, telling her that necessity had evolved into something deeper. I think, she said carefully, that I might want more, but I am frightened, Russell. I have been hurt before. I have trusted men who proved unworthy of that trust. I know, Russell said gently, and I cannot promise I will never hurt you or disappoint you because I am only human. But I can promise that I will never deliberately deceive you. What I feel for you is real, Hannah. It may not be what either of us planned, but it is real. She squeezed his hand, a silent acknowledgement of his words. They sat together in the gathering darkness, holding hands like courting youngsters, and Hannah felt something in her chest that had been closed and guarded begin to carefully, tentatively open. The next morning, Miguel rode in from the northern pasture with news that one of the breeding cows was having trouble birthing. Russell immediately saddled his horse, and Hannah found herself asking if she could come along. It will not be pleasant, Russell warned. Birthing can be difficult and messy. I would still like to learn, Hannah insisted. If I am to be part of this ranch, I should understand all aspects of it. So Russell helped her onto one of the gentler mares, and they rode out together with Miguel. The cow was indeed in distress, lowing pitifully as she struggled with a calf that was not positioned correctly. Russell knelt in the grass beside her, speaking in soothing tones as he examined the situation. "The calf is breech," he told Miguel. "We will need to turn it." What followed was an hour of intense, careful work. Russell stripped to his undershirt and reached inside the cow, his face tight with concentration as he felt for the calf's positioning. Miguel held the cow's head, keeping her as calm as possible. Hannah found herself holding Russell's coat and hat, murmuring encouragement even though she was not entirely sure who she was encouraging: the cow, the calf, or Russell himself. Finally, with a rush of fluid and one last heaving push from the exhausted mother, the calf slid free into Russell's waiting hands. He cleared its nose and mouth, and after a heart-stopping moment, the little creature gasped and began to breathe. The cow immediately turned to her baby, lowing softly and beginning to clean it with her rough tongue. Russell sat back on his heels, covered in birth fluids and blood, grinning with fierce satisfaction. "We did it. They are both going to be fine." Hannah found herself grinning back at him, caught up in the joy of new life and successful struggle. "You were amazing." "We were amazing," Russell corrected, though Hannah had done little more than watch. "This is what it means to be a rancher, Hannah. Fighting for every life, every birth, every season. It is hard work, but it matters." Watching him there in the grass, exhausted and filthy and absolutely radiant with the triumph of saving 2 lives, Hannah felt the last of her defenses crumble. She was in love with her husband. Completely, irrevocably in love with this man who had married her as a practical necessity and somehow become the center of her world. They rode back to the ranch house in the warm spring morning, and at the porch, Russell dismounted and helped Hannah down. But instead of releasing her immediately, he held her there with his hands on her waist, looking down at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Hannah," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "Yes," she whispered, not sure what she was agreeing to, but knowing it was everything. He kissed her then, really kissed her for the first time since their wedding day. His lips were warm and slightly chapped from sun and wind, and the kiss tasted of possibility and promise. Hannah's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid reality of him beneath her palms, and she kissed him back with all the feelings she had been trying to contain. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Russell rested his forehead against hers. "I am a mess," he said with a shaky laugh. "I should not have done that before cleaning up." "I do not care," Hannah said, and she meant it. "Russell, I need you to know something. This stopped being a business arrangement for me weeks ago. I tried to fight it, tried to keep my distance, but I cannot anymore. I have fallen in love with you." She felt him go very still against her. Then his arms tightened around her waist, and he lifted her completely off her feet in a fierce embrace. "Say it again," he demanded. "I love you," Hannah repeated, laughing now even as tears streamed down her face. "I love you, Russell Whitmore, and it is terrifying and wonderful all at once." "I love you too," Russell said, setting her down gently and cupping her face in his hands, apparently unconcerned about the fact that he was getting her clean dressed dirty. "I have been halfway in love with you since that first night in the saloon when you looked at me with those incredible eyes and said yes to the maddest proposal ever made. But I did not want to push you, did not want you to feel obligated." "I do not feel obligated," Hannah assured him. "I feel blessed. I came west looking for a home and I found that, but I also found something I never expected. I found someone who sees me as an equal partner, someone who values my mind as well as my presence. I found you." They stood there on the porch, holding each other, until Maria's voice floated up from her house, calling something to one of the children. Russell reluctantly released Hannah and stepped back. "I need to wash up," he said. "But tonight after supper, would you take a walk with me?" There is something I want to show you." "I would like that very much," Hannah agreed. That evening, after a meal that Hannah barely tasted despite having cooked it herself, Russell took her hand and led her away from the ranch house. They walked through the sage as the sun began its descent, following a path that led to a small rise overlooking the entire ranch property. From here, Hannah could see the house, the outbuildings, the corrals with their horses, and beyond that, the rolling rangeland stretching toward distant mountains. "This is my favorite spot on the entire ranch," Russell told her. "I come here when I need to think or when I need to remember why I am doing all this." "It is beautiful," Hannah said, taking in the view. The evening light painted everything in shades of gold and purple. "When my mother died, my father brought me up here," Russell continued. "He told me that the land would endure long after we were gone, but what we did with our time here mattered. He said that the measure of a life was not in how much you accumulated, but in what you built that others could use after you." I did not really understand what he meant until I was older. Hannah leaned into his side, and his arm came around her shoulders naturally. "And now I understand that he was talking about legacy, not just property or possessions, but the lives we touch and the people we care for. This ranch is not just land and cattle. It is home to Miguel and Maria and their children. It provides employment for the hands and their families. It supplies beef to communities throughout Nevada. It matters beyond just my own interests." "Your father was a wise man," Hannah observed. "Even if his methods for ensuring you married were somewhat unorthodox." Russell laughed. "I cursed his name thoroughly when I first heard the terms of the will. But now, I think I understand what he was trying to tell me. The ranch needed someone who cared about it as a home, not just as property." "It needed you. I needed it too," Hannah admitted. "I needed a place where I could belong, where I could contribute something meaningful. I needed purpose." "And now," Russell asked, turning to face her fully, "what do you need now, Hannah?" She reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Now I need you. Just you, Russell. That is enough." He kissed her again as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. When they finally walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, everything had changed between them. They were no longer strangers bound by a practical agreement. They were partners, companions, and something that neither of them had quite dared to hope for. They were two people genuinely, deeply in love. That night, Hannah moved her belongings into Russell's room. He helped her carry the few dresses and personal items from one room to the other, and when everything was arranged, they stood together beside the bed they would now share. "Are you certain?" Russell asked, giving her one last opportunity to reconsider. "I am more certain of this than I have been of anything in my entire life," Hannah replied, and she meant every word. Their wedding night, delayed by weeks of careful consideration and growing affection, was tender and sweet. Russell was gentle with her, taking his time to show her with actions as well as words how much he cherished her. Hannah discovered that the chemistry between them extended beyond intellectual compatibility and friendship into something physical and profound. They fit together, in mind and body and spirit, in a way that felt nothing short of miraculous. Afterward, lying in Russell's arms with her head on his chest and his fingers trailing through her loosened hair, Hannah felt peace settle over her like a blanket. "I thought love was supposed to be complicated," she murmured. "All the novels I read back in Boston made it seem like this agonizing, dramatic thing full of misunderstandings and grand gestures." Russell's chest rumbled with laughter beneath her ear. "I think we had our share of drama getting here, but maybe the best kind of love is the kind that feels simple once you stop fighting it, the kind that feels like coming home." "Yes," Hannah agreed. Like coming home, the summer passed in a blur of hard work and quiet happiness. Hannah threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch life. She helped with the branding that spring, much to the amusement of the ranch hands who had never seen a Boston-educated lady working cattle. She learned to ride well enough to accompany Russell on his rounds, checking fences and water sources across the sprawling property. She worked alongside Maria in the garden, growing vegetables that would see them through the coming winter. But more than the work, she treasured the small moments of intimacy with Russell. Morning coffee shared on the porch before the day's work began. Stolen kisses in the barn when they happened to both be there at the same time. Evenings spent in comfortable silence, with Hannah reading by lamplight while Russell worked on account books or mended tack. Nights spent wrapped in each other's arms, learning the geography of each other's bodies and hearts. In July, a lawyer from Reno rode out to the ranch. Hannah felt a moment of anxiety, wondering if there was some challenge to their marriage or Russell's ownership of the ranch. But the lawyer, a different one than the man who had read Russell's father's will, simply needed Russell to sign some documents confirming his married status and his continued operation of the ranch. "Everything is in order, Mr. Whitmore," the lawyer said as Russell signed the papers. "Your father's conditions have been met. The ranch is legally and completely yours with no further stipulations or requirements." After the lawyer left, Russell turned to Hannah with a grin. "We did it. The ranch is secure." "We did indeed," Hannah agreed. But instead of the relief she expected to feel, she found herself oddly sad. "Russell, now that the conditions of your father's will are satisfied, what happens to our marriage?" Russell looked at her in genuine confusion. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you married me to keep the ranch," Hannah said carefully. "Now that you have achieved that goal, do you wish things to change between us?" Understanding dawned on Russell's face, followed quickly by something that looked like panic. He crossed to her in 3 long strides and took her hands in his. "Hannah Whitmore, look at me. I married you to keep the ranch, that is true, but I fell in love with you because of who you are, because you are brilliant and brave and you make me laugh. Because you care about this land and the people on it as much as I do. Because I cannot imagine waking up without you beside me or going through a single day without seeing your face. The ranch may have brought us together, but it is not what keeps us together. Do you understand?" Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. "I needed to hear you say it. I needed to know that you still wanted me for me, not just because I fulfilled a legal requirement." "I want you," Russell said firmly. "Today, tomorrow, and every day for the rest of my life. You are my wife, Hannah. Not because of a piece of paper or a lawyer's documents, but because you are the person I choose every single day." She kissed him then, pouring all her relief and love and commitment into the kiss. When they broke apart, she was smiling through her tears. "I choose you too, every single day." That autumn brought the first real test of their partnership. A drought that had been building through the summer intensified, and the water sources that usually sustained the ranch began to dry up. Russell and Miguel spent long days riding the property, assessing the situation and making difficult decisions about which pastures to abandon, and where to move the herds to access what little water remained. Hannah took over managing communications with other ranchers in the area, coordinating efforts to share resources and information. She wrote letters to agricultural experts in California, seeking advice on drought management. She worked with Maria to preserve every bit of food they could, knowing that if they had to sell cattle early because of the drought, money would be tight through the winter. One particularly difficult evening, Russell came in from a 14-hour day in the saddle to find Hannah still awake, working on the accounts by lamplight at the kitchen table. He could see the worry etched into her features as she tallied numbers that probably were not adding up the way she hoped. "Come to bed," he said gently, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "The numbers will still be there in the morning." "We are going to have to sell more cattle than planned," Hannah said, her voice tight with frustration. "Even if the drought breaks tomorrow, we have already lost too many water sources to sustain the herd at current numbers." "I know," Russell said. "I have been avoiding accepting it, but you are right. We will drive 200 head to market next week instead of the 100 we planned. It will be enough to see us through until spring." Hannah turned in his arms to look up at him. "I hate seeing you work so hard only to have weather undermine everything." "That is ranching," Russell said with a tired smile. "We are always at the mercy of forces beyond our control. But we adapt, we survive, and we come back stronger. We will get through this, Hannah, together." And they did. The cattle drive to market was exhausting, but Russell got a fair price for the herd. They tightened their belts through the winter, making every dollar stretch as far as possible. And when spring came, bringing with it blessed rain that filled the streams and water holes, they were able to rebuild. More importantly, the drought had proven to both of them that their partnership was stronger than any challenge they might face. They had worked together, supported each other, and emerged with their love and commitment not just intact but deepened. In May of 1883, just over a year after their unconventional wedding, Hannah realized she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Russell, wanting to be sure before raising his hopes. But when she finally told him over breakfast one morning, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He stared at her for a long moment, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. Then he set the cup down carefully, rose from his chair, and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen while laughing like a madman. "We are having a baby," he asked when he finally set her down. "We are really having a baby. In late November or early December, according to my calculations," Hannah confirmed, laughing at his exuberance. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased?" Russell cupped her face in his hands, his eyes bright with emotion. "Hannah, I am beyond pleased. I am ecstatic. I am terrified. I am so many things I cannot even name them all. But mostly, I am grateful. Grateful for you, for this life we are building, for this family we are creating." The pregnancy was not easy. Hannah suffered terrible morning sickness through the summer months, and the Nevada heat made her uncomfortable and irritable. But Russell was unfailingly patient and supportive, bringing her cool water when she needed it, adjusting his work schedule so he could be near the house during the worst of her sick spells, and rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings while she laughed at how enormous she was becoming. Maria was an invaluable source of advice and support, having been through pregnancy twice herself. She taught Hannah what to expect, what was normal and what was cause for concern, and assured her that everything she was feeling was perfectly natural. "The sickness passes," Maria promised. "And then you will feel better than you have ever felt. You will see. The second part of pregnancy is beautiful." Maria was right. By September, Hannah's morning sickness had subsided, and she entered a phase where she felt energetic and strong despite her growing belly. She continued to manage the household and the ranch accounts, refusing to be treated like an invalid just because she was expecting a child. "I am pregnant, not ill," she informed Russell when he tried to prevent her from hanging laundry. "I need to stay active." "I know," Russell said, holding up his hands in surrender. "But indulge me a little worry, would you? You are carrying the most precious cargo in Nevada." In early December, as the first real cold of winter settled over the ranch, Hannah went into labor. Russell sent Miguel racing to Reno to fetch the doctor, while Maria came to the main house to assist. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Russell paced the hallway outside their bedroom, desperate to be with Hannah but respecting Maria's insistence that he would only be in the way. Finally, in the late afternoon of December 6th, his son was born. Maria emerged from the bedroom, beaming, and told Russell he could come in. He entered to find Hannah propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Russell crossed to the bed on shaking legs and looked down at the tiny face peering out from the blankets. The baby had dark hair like his own and what might become Hannah's gray-green eyes, though it was hard to tell in the dim lamplight. He was perfect. "Can I hold him?" Russell asked, his voice rough with emotion. Hannah carefully transferred the baby into Russell's arms. He held his son with the same gentle confidence he used with newborn calves, supporting the tiny head and cradling the small body against his chest. "He is beautiful," Russell whispered. "Hannah, he is absolutely beautiful. He is ours," Hannah said, reaching up to touch Russell's face. "Our son. Our family." They named him James, after Hannah's father, with Russell as his middle name. Jamie, as they called him, proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who kept them both up at night with his demands for feeding. But neither of them minded the sleepless nights. They would take turns walking the floor with Jamie, soothing him when he fussed, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes, and feeling their hearts expand in ways they had not known were possible. Watching Russell with their son, Hannah would sometimes think back to that night in the Golden Sage Saloon when a desperate rancher had proposed a marriage of convenience to a desperate woman with nowhere else to turn. She would remember the fear and uncertainty she had felt, the careful distance they had maintained in those early weeks, and it would seem almost impossible that those two wary strangers had become the family they were now. "What are you thinking about?" Russell asked one evening as they sat together by the fire, with Jamie sleeping in a cradle that Miguel had built as a gift. "About how far we have come," Hannah said. "About how this all started as a practical arrangement and became something I never imagined possible." Russell reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "My father would have loved you. He would have loved knowing that his unconventional will brought us together." "Do you think he planned it?" Hannah asked. "Do you think he somehow knew that forcing you to marry would lead to this?" "I think he was a practical man who recognized that I needed someone to share my life with," Russell said thoughtfully. "Whether he intended for it to be a love match, I cannot say. But I like to think that wherever he is pleased with how things worked out." "I am pleased with how things worked out," Hannah said. "I came west thinking I was running away from loss and disappointment, but I was actually running toward this. Toward you, toward our life together, toward our family. I was running toward home." Russell raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You are home, Hannah. You will always be home to me." The years that followed were not without their challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle losses and market fluctuations, the constant work of maintaining and growing the ranch. But through it all, Russell and Hannah faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing season. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Margaret in 1885 and another son, Thomas, in 1888. The main house that had seemed so spacious when Hannah first arrived began to feel full of life and noise and the beautiful chaos of a growing family. Maria and Miguel's children grew alongside the Whitmore children, creating a community on the ranch that felt like an extended family. Elena Torres and Margaret Whitmore became inseparable friends. Young Pablo took Jamie and Thomas under his wing, teaching them how to ride and rope and handle cattle. Russell expanded the ranch operations gradually, buying adjoining land when it became available, and building the herd back up to healthy numbers. Hannah took on more responsibility as the children grew older, not just managing the household, but becoming a full partner in ranch decisions. Her education and business acumen proved invaluable time and again, and Russell relied on her judgment as much as he relied on Miguel's expertise with the cattle and horses. In 1892, on a warm spring evening very much like the one where Russell had first told Hannah he loved her, they walked up to Russell's favorite overlook above the ranch. The children were all asleep under Maria's watchful eye, and for once, they had a few hours to themselves. 10 years, Hannah said, looking out over the land that had become so dear to her. Has it really been 10 years since that night in the saloon? 10 years since I made the best decision of my life, Russell agreed. 10 years since I proposed the most unconventional marriage in Nevada history. Hannah laughed. I think there have probably been more unconventional marriages, but ours certainly had an unusual beginning. And the best possible continuation, Russell added. He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid reality of him against her, as comforting and essential as it had been from those early days. You ever wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently? Hannah asked. If I had said no that night? If you had found someone else? Never, Russell said firmly. I believe we were meant to find each other, Hannah. Maybe it was my father's will that brought us together, or maybe it was fate, or maybe it was just extraordinary luck. But however it happened, I am grateful for it every single day. Hannah tilted her face up to his, and he kissed her with the familiar passion that had only deepened over a decade of marriage. When they finally broke apart, she smiled up at him. I am grateful too, she said. I came west looking for a home, and I found so much more. I found purpose and partnership. I found a place where I could be fully myself. I found love that transformed everything. We found each other, Russell said simply. Everything else grew from that. They stood together on the hillside as the stars began to emerge in the vast Nevada sky, holding each other and watching over the ranch that had brought them together and the family they had built. Behind them, the lights of the main house glowed warm and welcoming. Smoke rose from the chimney of Miguel and Maria's house. In the corrals, horses moved peacefully in the gathering dusk. It was not the life either of them had planned or expected. It had begun with desperation and necessity, with two strangers making an agreement that first night in a Reno saloon. But from that unlikely beginning had grown something remarkable, a true partnership, a deep and abiding love, and a family that would carry forward for generations. Hannah Erickson had needed a home. Russell Whitmore had needed a wife to keep his ranch. They had made an agreement, and in keeping that agreement, they had found everything they truly needed. They had found each other, and in doing so, they had found a love that transformed a practical arrangement into a romance that would endure for the rest of their lives. As they walked back down to the ranch house hand in hand, the future stretched before them full of promise. There would be more challenges ahead, certainly, more hard seasons and difficult decisions. But there would also be more laughter around the dinner table, more children growing into adulthood on this land they loved, more evenings spent together watching the sunset over the mountains, and more mornings waking up beside each other grateful for another day together. The ranch that Russell had fought so hard to keep had become more than property or legacy. It had become the foundation for a family built on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and a love that had surprised them both with its depth and staying power. And every time Hannah looked at Russell, every time he took her hand or smiled at her across a crowded room, she remembered that night in the Golden Sage Saloon when two desperate strangers had taken a chance on each other. It had been the best gamble either of them had ever made, and they would spend the rest of their lives grateful for the courage it had taken to say yes to an uncertain future that had turned out to be more beautiful than anything they could have imagined. Their love story had begun with necessity, but it had blossomed into something transcendent, proving that sometimes the most practical decisions could lead to the most extraordinary happiness. And so they lived, worked, loved, and built their life together on that Nevada ranch. Two people who had started as strangers bound by agreement and became partners bound by love, creating a family legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Their children would grow up hearing the story of how their parents met, of the unconventional proposal and the marriage of convenience that became a true love match. And they would understand that the best things in life often come from taking chances on the impossible. Russell and Hannah Whitmore had needed each other in practical ways, but they had come to want each other in ways that transcended practicality. They had built not just a ranch but a home, not just a marriage but a partnership, not just a family but a legacy of love that proved the human heart was capable of finding beauty and meaning in even the most unlikely beginnings. And that, in the end, was the greatest achievement of all.